So we're starting a new series this wonderful month of December. Anybody glad it's December? Yes. Had a great Thanksgiving? Yes. Okay. I talked to a lot of people and you said that it was a great time. We had a great time too. It was awesome. Spending time with family and being thankful, eating turkey and all the fixings, right? So we are going from Thanksgiving toward Christmas, and in this season, we just wanted to speak about generosity and talk about radical generosity. That God was so radically generous with us that He gave His Son. And then in us, it should spur on that kind of radical generosity to give of ourselves, to share with people. I'm going to talk about a few different things, but I want to get in this. And, in 2 Corinthians, Paul's talking to the Corinthians, but he wants to talk to them about another church, and he's saying some things about, and I'm just going to paraphrase this before I get into reading the scripture, but that this church, the Macedonians, that though they were very poor and though they had gone through so many different things, that they were so filled with joy because of God in their lives, that they were radically generous, that they gave beyond what they could possibly imagine, and they wanted to do even more. That he said that God had done something for them and they wanted to help people. And they gave, even when they were poor. And that's what, over the next couple of weeks we're going to be talking about. It's not about some big amount of money. It's just the thought of that we can give, whether it's a big amount of money, a small amount of money, we can give of who we are, of what we do. We can help people, that this is what God has done for us, and this is what we need to do for people, and it makes a difference in our lives. And I want to tell you something. I'm going to go through some stuff, and hopefully you won't get lost in this. I was kind of lost reading it because it's scientific stuff, but I thought it was very interesting because I was just looking up the scientific studies of generosity, and that all kinds of universities and scientists, doctors have studied the effects of generosity. And you know what they found out is they found out that God created us to give, that He created us. Now some try to explain it away. It's kind of funny actually listening or reading them trying to explain away that God created us this way. But they found out that there's a couple of points in the brain that are activated whenever we're generous, whenever we give. Whenever we give of ourselves, it actually is better than receiving. Our brain functions and reacts differently when we give and in a better way than when we receive something. Isn't that amazing? There's a couple of points, and one is the ventricle tegmental area in our brain that helps to control reward, like that reward response, like I won something, like that response, that feeling that we get, and pleasure. When things are pleasurable, whenever we have that response, that feeling in our body, that this part of the brain actually controls that. And our motor function, our motor function, how we do things and move, and those things are affected by this. So whenever we give, it said this part of our brain, and then also the subgenual area. You guys heard of that one? Anybody? Maybe a doctor or a nurse around here is like, yeah, I heard about that. But a part of the brain that controls appetite or helps affect appetite, sleep, mood, anxiety, self-esteem, and processing of sadness. These two parts of the brain are real close together, right behind the prefrontal cortex, and they help to control all these different things in our life, things that actually make us feel better and do better in our lives. That when we give, they saw this firing, this glowing of our brain in those parts of our brain whenever we're giving. That God has created us to give. That He's created us to be joyful and get joy and to respond in such a positive way. Like these areas are areas that are affected by, like when people are becoming addicted to drugs or different things, that they're trying to get this feeling, that these are the same feelings that we are supposed to be getting from giving. Isn't that wild? But generosity is being willing to give unstingily. Generosity is giving and not expecting to receive something in return. It's giving out of the goodness of your heart. That's what generosity is. It's saying, I just want to do something for somebody, to help them, not to help me, but to help them, to bless them. In 2 Corinthians 8, verses 8 and 9, it says, I'm not trying, this is the Message Bible, I'm not trying to order you around against your will, but by bringing in the Macedonians' enthusiasm as a stimulus to your love, I'm hoping to bring the best out of you. You're familiar with the generosity of our Master, Jesus Christ. Rich as He was, He gave it all away for us. In one stroke, He became poor and we became rich. See, Paul is sharing now, he's saying, look, I'm telling you this stuff about the Macedonians and their generosity and how they were just spurred on because of God and what He had done for them to give out of their hearts more than they possibly felt that they even had the means to do. And I want to tell you why. He says, I want to show you something, that because our God was so gracious and because He gave His Son. Listen, Jesus came, as I love the way it says it here, as rich as He was, because He was seated next to the Father. But He became poor. He came, what does that mean? He came to us, to this earth, to live as one of us, God and man, to take on our bodily form, to take on those things. Why? So that He could take the punishment, the sin, the shame. He was giving of Himself so that we could become rich in who He is. And Paul's saying, and when you see this, it should do something in your life, that this thought of generosity or helping people or giving, that it is rooted and based in what Christ did for us. That because He did that, because God sent His Son, because Jesus went to the cross, that He came down and lived as one of us for a time and took that sin and that shame, because He was so generous that it should spur on. If He's done something in your life, if He's changed you, if you know Him now, if you have this relationship with Him that you do, most of us do, have that relation, all of us, hopefully. I'm not like calling anybody out. I'm just saying, like, as we come to this relationship with Christ, that it should explode this thought of generosity in us because of who He is and what He's done for us. The call of God as we come to know Him is not a call to get, but it's a call to give. Whenever you have a call of God on your life, which you do, whatever it is, you know what it is? It's to give of yourself. If God calls a missionary, if God calls an evangelist, or whatever he calls you to, it's to give of yourself and what he's done for you and in you to others. It's a call to give. But it isn't just relegated to sharing with people. It should be evident in the rest of our lives, in our finances, and just how we live and what we do. That this generosity that we have seen from God should be seen in us to other people. Generosity creates growth. In 2 Corinthians 9:6, it says, "But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully." I mean, seems pretty easy, right? Using this analogy of a farmer. If you sow sparingly, if you sow just a little bit, the harvest that comes back is just going to be a little bit that comes from that little bit of seed that you've sown. If you sow bountifully, if you throw out a mass amount of seed, there's going to be so much that comes because you've thrown out so much seed. And he says, "So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver." There's a couple of things in here that I'd like to point out. It says, "So let each one give as he purposes in his heart." This is not just a mind or a mental thing. It's a heart thing. It's a soul thing. This is not something that we just figure out in our heads and give, but what is that nudge or that instinct, that thing that God is speaking to you to ask you? Because see, that's what, it's not in our heads whenever God asks us to give or to do something for somebody. He speaks to us in our heart. He opens our heart with compassion to give. He says, as each one purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity. For God loves a cheerful giver. Not of necessity. Oh, well, I have to do this. See, being generous and radically generous isn't something out of necessity. We have to pay a car payment. We have to pay back a loan or whatever. We have to do some things whenever we get ourselves in those contracts. But what we don't have to do, but sometimes we feel like we have to do it, is give. Is be generous. See, there's something in here that I'm just thinking about, is that whether it's giving to the church or giving to those in need, it's how we've purposed in our heart, and whether we're cheerful or we're begrudgingly giving because, oh, well, apparently God said that I need to do this. You could give so much to people or charity or whatever in that way, and it doesn't have the impact that it does whenever you do it with a heart of just gratitude and joy of just being able to help somebody and give. It says in verse 8, "And God is able to make all grace abound towards you, that you always having all sufficiency in all things may have an abundance for every good work." many times when we think about giving and being generous and giving to others, it's almost like this, so that I'm supposed to be blessed. I'm supposed to be, rewarded sevenfold for these things that I've given. If I give, then God will make me wealthy. And that's not the case that God or Paul is presenting here. What he's presenting is that our life will be rich. That our life will be rewarding. That as we've seen in these scientific studies, if I possibly explain them in a good way, I don't know. But that it enriches our life and who we are, how we think. And in those studies, it said that even in older people, that when they're involved in community outreach or generosity or getting together to help people, that they actually, doesn't matter their age, it doesn't matter, it's not because some are younger and some are older and whatever else, but when they're involved in something, they live almost 50% longer. That there's a drastic range. That those that are involved in giving, instead of just trying to hold on and trying to make it, that at an older age that you can live longer. And it said that this actually affects your giving, and generosity actually affects your blood pressure. It was saying, because this is probably some of the reasons. It affects stress. It relieves stress by being generous. It lowers your blood pressure. I'm not trying to speak all scientific. I'm just trying to say, how awesome is God that he's created us in this way, that helping people actually helps us live longer. That helping people actually helps us to feel those wonderful feelings, like all these other different things that we could try to get from drugs or alcohol, or these pleasures that we could probably try to find in different places, but God has created us so we can get those by actually helping people. By actually being generous, that we can receive a full life. I don't know about you, but I just like, and look, to tell a little story. I have that face. It's going to be a great one. Pastor Tori and I are a little different on the giving in our earlier times in marriage. She is a giver. Like, give everything you possibly can to others. Like, give it away. Like, I don't own anything. And for whatever reason, I struggled with that. Like giving. I struggled with, these are things that, these are my things. I don't know about giving them away. And it was hard. But you know what's interesting is that as we've been married and walked through life, that I've seen so many times that as we give, as we purpose to just joyfully give something, and we've given, it wasn't an expensive car, but we owned a used car years ago, and we gave it to somebody. And I owned a guitar. You might think, do you play the guitar? No, I don't. I actually wanted to learn, but then I didn't ever play it. So I gave it away. And but in those moments in my life, I've learned something and I've seen something. That I didn't see before. And it's that I have one of the best feelings in my life. That the reaction that happens in my brain and in my life whenever I give, and I'm not saying that I'm the best giver around now, but I'm speaking to myself too and saying, what can I do more to even go further in being generous with those around me? But I've seen that my life has changed for the better, that I've grown, that I've had a better outlook on life and been happy and some sadness. See, whenever you hold on to things, another study, the part of the study is that when you hold on to things, when you're stingy, it actually reacts in the opposite way. And it causes us those feelings of sadness or depression or anxiety. But God has created us to give. God has created us to be radically generous. That we reap the harvest of godliness and those characteristics and things that He's created us to live in. We see those happen as we change our attitude around about giving and live open-handed. In 2 Corinthians 9, 10, and 11, the Message Bible, it says, "The most generous God who gives seed to the farmer that becomes bread for your meals is more than extravagant with you. He gives you something you can then give away, which grows into full-formed lives, robust in God, wealthy in every way, so that you can be generous in every way, producing with us a great praise to God." He's saying that what God does in our lives whenever we respond in this way to His generosity by allowing that to flow through us and us being generous, it creates in us robust, God-filled, godly lives. And then our lives become something. And then we see things turn around. And God doing a work in our finances, doing a work in our marriage, doing a work in these different areas that creates a space for us to be even more generous. In Luke 19:8, there's a very interesting story because it is about a wee little man. Anybody remember the song? Vernon, you want to sing the song to us? He didn't hear me. So you got this guy, Zacchaeus, who basically is one of these tax kingpin guys that's like running around, just treating everybody wrong, charging them more than they should be charged, making himself wealthy, like doing all this stuff and just taking and taking and taking. But when he met Jesus, everything changed. When does this change? It should change. And it does change. Whenever we have a radical encounter with Jesus, then we become radically generous. In Luke 19:8, it says, "Then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, 'Look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor. And if I've taken anything from anyone by false accusations,'" he's like, "if I have," but he had. "If maybe I did, if I've taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold." Wow. I mean, the change in this guy's life. He was running this scheme, getting money, getting wealthy from people that were hurting and poor and needed alone, or doing all they can to make it. And he was living his life large. And then he met Jesus. He had an encounter with Jesus, and he said, look, I've had this encounter, and I'm making things right. And not only am I making things right, if I did something in the wrong way, I actually just went beyond where I should have gone, because I felt so bad because of the generosity that you have had with me. I felt that I just needed to be even more generous with those. You know, just before this, there's this story about the rich young ruler, right? The young man that comes and he's talking to Jesus, and Jesus is like, hey. It gets to the point, really, if I move it forward a little bit, where Jesus is like, listen, you've lived right. You've kind of done the okay things, but the problem is, are you actually following me? Are you actually not just trying to live right, but have a relationship with me? And he says, just sell all your possessions and come and follow me. Follow me where I'm going. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. And that encounter that he had with Jesus wasn't one that changed that rich young ruler. But then you have Zacchaeus. Think about this. The tax guy, the swindler, the guy that was doing wrong to everybody, and all of a sudden he became the most generous guy around. That's what I want for my life. And that's what kind of has happened. I've had stuff happen in my life. I mean, it's hard to believe. But I've had stuff happen in my life that has caused me in my past to be locked up and stingy. And you know that all that brought me was sadness and having a few things that were mine, but were meaningless. But whenever I've allowed God to do something in my life and allowed myself to see how generous He was, to understand the full weight, as much as I can understand the full weight of who He is and what He's done for me, because I don't claim to possibly understand fully. I hope to grow in this every day, to understand a little bit more. And that's how you do it. You allow it to change you. It affects your life. You see it in the way that you walk, the way that you talk, the way that you give, the generosity, the joy, all these different things. And then the next day you wake up and say, God, show me more, because I want more of who you are. Back to 2 Corinthians 8:9 in the Message. You're familiar with the generosity of our Master, Jesus Christ. Rich as He was, He gave it all away for us. In one stroke, He became poor, and we became rich. He gave so much. How could I not respond in a way of giving? And of course, we respond by giving ourselves to Him and the things that He has for us, what He wants us to do in our lives, how He wants us to move and act and help people. And ultimately, like I said, the call and the change in us, that thing that he calls us to, is to give in one of many different ways. And we all can move in all those ways. Helping people, being generous with our finances, helping people, being generous with our love and our affection, being generous with what we've come to know about God and sharing that grace with everybody else around us. God has called us to be generous givers. Generosity is one of the evidences of an encounter with Jesus. It is. And I hope that in this message today that is the main point that comes across. Is that an encounter with God, an encounter with Jesus, knowing him or coming into a relationship with him should change our lives in the area of generosity.